so much for joining us at our conference this year. I believe that there's a lot of interest in the education sector. It's receiving a lot of funding at the moment. It's one of the most supported sectors. But a question that keeps coming up is, why do you feel there is a particular focus on maths and science when there is also a literacy gap? And yet there seems to be more focus on the maths and science rather than on literacy.
Okay. If we look at education and we look at studies done on spending by donors, in fact it is the most supported sector. About 90% of all donors support education. And the part of education that's supported the most is maths and science. Now, supporting maths and science, you can support it at the higher end. That means at the FET end, and that's supporting either through learners or supporting teacher education. But my view is that you also need to support it at the lower ends as well, because you actually need grounding in your basic numeracy skills and your basic literacy skills before you actually can perform at later levels in maths and science.
Okay. Do you feel that there should be an equal amount of attention on literacy and maths and science? Do you feel perhaps that there's almost a skewed attention to the maths and science and the literacy has been left behind, or do you think that the balance is correct?
You know, in looking at your strategy in supporting education, perhaps you can look at a two-pronged approach. Okay, if you're looking at the needs of the country, we definitely need more learners that come out of matric with quality maths and science passes, and therefore you have to support the upper end. You have to support the FET sector. So some of the money has to go there. But if we're looking at education and we have a long-term view, you have to support the foundation phase and you have to give money there. The priority of the government at the moment is to focus on the foundation phase and at the lower levels, and I see ECD is getting more money at the moment. For a donor working in education, I think to have a balanced approach. I must say a lot of donors are focused more on the upper ends because of the economic imperatives of the country, but perhaps we can be a bit more balanced in the way we spend our funding.
Okay. If you are in charge of a CSI program in an organisation and either one that is starting out and you're trying to sort of establish which sectors you will be working in, or perhaps education is not a sector that you're currently focusing on and you want to move into that sector, how do you feel, or what do you feel are the motivations behind education? Why is education so supported, and why should there be so much spend in the education sector?
Okay. If you talk to economists, they will say that we've got to get the education system right. Okay, so it's an economic imperative, it's a national imperative. For me, it stands out as something that we need to focus on in terms of our corporate social investment spending. The critical thing is then where to invest to make impact. And there, the kinds of things that you have to take into account is what budget you have, okay? What is the core business of the sector you're working in, and is there any alignment that you want to bring in terms of what your business does and the kind of investment that you're making in education? And then you have to critically look at where your focus is going to be and the impact that you can make with the budget that you have.
Okay. I just want to pick up on what you're saying about where you allocate your spend. how does a company decide whether their spend should go to a more functional school with perhaps an established program, or whether they should go into really the poorest of the poor, where perhaps there is no program at all. How can that money best be spent, and where will it have the most impact?
Okay. I must say, when we all started working in education, our immediate rush was to go and work with the poorest of the poor schools in the most rural area, because we were all working off a needs-driven approach. I think now that we've had time to reflect and look at evaluations and look at some of the lessons we've learned, we've looked at what is the best way a donor can get involved in the education sector. And particularly for a foundation like Zenex that has been working in education for 12 years, we've seen that we can best work with functional schools. Now, functional schools can there's a range of ways you can look at functional schools. You can look at functional schools as those that are performing at the top end in terms of results, and you can look at functional schools as those that have potential to take in an intervention. And the way you'd work with them would be you'd put in the intervention depending on the type of school that you're working in. We're saying don't work in non-functional schools where you have HR issues, because as a donor you're coming in as an external agent, and it's the Department of Education's responsibility to deal with HR issues in a school. That means that kind of school is not ready to take in an external intervention in that school.